My name is Emily Carter, I am 27 years old. And I never thought I would end up being the bad guy in my own family. But here we are. My mother Linda is 52 and my stepfather Rick is 55. He has been in my life since I was 10 years old. My biological father Tom died when I was 8. I still remember the way my mother used to look before she met Rick. Sad eyes, tired hands, and that kind of heavy silence that fills a room when someone has lost too much. When Rick came along, he made her laugh again. Back then I thought he was a hero. He brought me candy from gas stations, called me his girl, and told me he was going to take care of us. For a while I believed him. As I grew up, I started to see the cracks. Rick only treated people well when they had something to give him. He was a mechanic, good with cars but terrible with money. He loved the thrill of getting something for nothing. And he always had a story about why nothing was ever his fault. When I was 18, he convinced my mother to co-sign a car loan for him. It was a silver Ford, nothing fancy, but it was the first time I heard my mother say she felt hopeful again. She believed it was going to help them get back on their feet. A few months later, that same car disappeared. Rick told us he had sold it to a buddy for cash because he needed to clear up some things. Those things turned out to be gambling debts. He never told my mother until the repo letters started coming. I will never forget her sitting at the kitchen table with her hair a mess, holding those letters, her voice trembling as she said, "I do not understand what happened." Rick stood over her yelling that she was overreacting and that the bank always makes mistakes. That night I offered to give her $500 from my part-time job at the diner. I remember her shaking her head and saying softly, "It is not your responsibility, sweetheart." Something in her tone told me she knew exactly who was to blame, but she was too tired to fight about it anymore. That was the first time I started to see Rick for who he really was. Over the years, the pattern never changed. Rick always had an excuse. He lost jobs, he made promises, he spent money like it was air. And my mother covered for him every single time. I moved out when I was 22 and promised myself I would never live like that. I built a quiet, stable life for myself. I work remotely as a project coordinator for a tech firm. Nothing glamorous but steady. And I rent a small apartment that I actually love. It smells like coffee and peace of mind. I still helped my mother whenever she needed it. Groceries, birthday dinners, half of the cost when her roof started leaking 2 years ago. I never hesitated. But I stopped helping Rick. 3 years ago he walked out of his job because his boss was disrespectful. That was how he described being fired for showing up drunk. Since then, he has been between opportunities, which is just another way of saying unemployed. Last week my phone rang in the middle of the afternoon. I saw Rick's name flash on the screen. I did not answer at first. He never calls me unless he wants something. After the third ring I picked up. His voice was strangely cheerful. "Hey Emmy. How are you doing, kiddo?" The fake sweetness made my skin crawl. I said, "What do you need, Rick?" He laughed and said, "Straight to the point, huh? Listen, I am in a bit of a bind. I need $2,500 for rent. I will pay you back next month, promise." I actually laughed out loud. "You do not even have a job, Rick. How would you pay me back?" His voice went flat. "Do not be like that. You know your mom and I are struggling." I said calmly, "I am not doing this. Go get a job like everyone else." He muttered something under his breath, something that sounded like ungrateful brat, and hung up. I put my phone down and thought that was the end of it. The next morning around 8 my doorbell rang. I was still in my pajamas, hair in a bun, coffee half made. When I opened the door, 2 police officers were standing there. They looked serious but not aggressive. One of them said, "Are you Emily Carter?" I said yes, confused. The other officer said, "We received a report that you stole money from your stepfather and refused to return it." For a second I just stared. Then I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it sounded so ridiculous that my brain refused to process it. "What money?" I asked. The officer said, "Your stepfather, Rick Thompson, reported that you transferred him $2,500 yesterday, then called your bank to reverse the transaction." I blinked at them. That never happened. I did not give him a single cent. They asked to come in, so I let them. I showed them my bank statement on my laptop. Not a single transfer, not even a pending one. Rick had even sent them a screenshot of a fake transaction, something he must have edited himself. One of the officers sighed and said, "We will note this as a false report, ma'am. We are sorry for the trouble." They left politely, and I sat down on the couch feeling this mix of anger and disbelief that made my chest hurt. I called my mother immediately. When she answered, her voice was soft and tired. I said, "Mom, what is going on? Why did the police just show up at my apartment?" She hesitated. "Rick said you promised to help and then changed your mind. He thought you canceled the transfer. I could hear her choosing her words carefully. I said, he lied, Mom. He faked a screenshot and told the police I stole from him. She sighed. He is just desperate, honey. You know how hard things are for him right now. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I said, he called the police on me and you are defending him? She said quietly, maybe you could have just helped a little. I could not even respond for a second. My throat felt tight. Mom, he lied to the police. He could have gotten me in serious trouble. She said, he is under a lot of pressure. He is not himself. I said, he has been like this for years, Mom. You just do not want to see it. She went silent, then said, I have to go, and hung up. I sat there staring at my phone for a long time. The absurdity of it all was almost funny. Almost. I thought about the little girl who used to wait at the window for Rick to come home from work with candy and bad jokes. I wondered what she would think if she saw this version of him. This bitter, manipulative man who would rather lie to the police than take responsibility for his own life. 2 days later, my cousin Jenna sent me a message. She never liked Rick and has always been blunt about it. The message said, you might want to see this, followed by screenshots. Rick had made a Facebook post that read, it is sad when family turns their back on you after everything you have done for them. The comment section was full of sympathy. People saying things like, hang in there, Rick. And family can be cruel sometimes. I ignored it at first. But then I saw one comment that made my stomach twist. My mother had replied under his post. She wrote, you did not deserve this, honey. That hurt more than I expected. A week later, things got worse. I had tried to put the whole incident behind me, telling myself that distance was the only thing that could keep me sane. I blocked Rick's number, stopped answering my mother's calls when she called from their house, and focused on work. For a few days, things felt almost normal. I cooked dinner, caught up on my shows, and even convinced myself that the silence meant they had finally realized how far they had crossed the line. I was wrong. It was Saturday morning around 10, when I heard the loud, urgent knock on my door. It was not the polite kind of knock someone gives when they come to visit. It was angry and patient, the kind that makes your stomach drop before your brain even registers why. I froze for a second, coffee mug halfway to my mouth, before I looked through the peephole. It was them, Rick and my mother. My first instinct was to pretend I was not home, but my car was in the parking lot, visible from the street. I took a deep breath, opened the door halfway, and before I could even say anything, Rick pushed his way in. His face was red, and his eyes were wild in that way I had seen before, the way he got when he drank too much or when someone dared to tell him no. My mother followed behind him, clutching her purse like it was a shield, already looking apologetic before a word was spoken. Rick started yelling before the door even closed. He said I had ruined his reputation by showing the police his fake transfer screenshot. He shouted that people were talking about him, that someone from his old job had heard about it, and that I had humiliated him in front of the whole damn town. I just stood there, feeling the heat rise up my neck, trying to stay calm. He stormed around my living room like he owned the place, gesturing wildly, his voice echoing off the walls. My mother kept saying his name softly, trying to calm him down, but her voice was small and shaky, and it only seemed to fuel him more. She turned to me at one point, eyes pleading, and said that I should just give him something to help him start over. Her exact words were, Emily, maybe you should just give him something to help him get back on his feet. I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. My mother had stood in my kitchen once, holding bank letters and crying because of this man, and now she was asking me to reward him for lying to the police. I told her I would not give him a cent. Rick spun toward me, eyes narrowing, and shouted that I thought I was better than him because I had some little job. He sneered when he said it, like stability and independence were something shameful. I tried to stay still, not react, but my hands were shaking. He started pacing, muttering to himself, saying things like how ungrateful I was, how he had raised me, how I owed him for everything he had done for my mother. It was such a twisted narrative that I felt my mind disconnecting, as if I were watching the scene from outside my own body. My mother kept saying his name, trying to touch his arm, but he jerked away from her every time. The tension in the room was thick and electric. I could feel the anger radiating from him. Then, suddenly, without warning, he reached for one of my plants, a pot hose I had been growing for years, one I had propagated from a tiny cutting back when I first moved out, and threw it across the room. The ceramic pot shattered against the wall, soil spilling onto the carpet, leaves torn. The sound snapped something in me. I told them both to leave. My voice came out louder than I expected, shaking but firm. I said that if they did not walk out right now, I would call the cops again. Rick glared at me, chest heaving, but for once he seemed unsure. My mother stepped between us, her voice trembling as she begged me not to do this. She said I was breaking the family apart. Tears rolling down her face, her hand still clutching her purse like it held the solution to everything. I stood my ground, and after a few tense seconds that felt like hours, Rick turned toward the door, muttering curses under his breath. My mother followed him, looking back at me with this mixture of sadness and disappointment that made my stomach twist. She cried, said I was breaking the family apart, and they left. A few days later, I got a letter from my mom, an actual handwritten letter which felt strange in itself. No one writes letters anymore, especially not my mother. Seeing her handwriting, slightly shaky but still familiar, made my chest ache before I even opened it. The envelope was pale pink, the kind she used to keep for birthday cards, and it smelled faintly like her perfume, that soft floral scent she always wore when I was a kid. For a moment before I even unfolded the paper, I felt like I was 10 years old again, like I was about to read a note from the mom who used to slip love letters into my lunchbox saying she was proud of me. The letter was written in blue ink, a few smudges near the middle where it looked like tears had fallen. She wrote that she was moving in with my aunt temporarily because Rick had been evicted. She didn't go into detail about the eviction, but I could read between the lines. It probably wasn't just about money. Rick had a habit of fighting with landlords, convinced everyone was out to get him. She said in the letter that she didn't know who to believe anymore, that everything had gotten so messy, and that she hoped we could rebuild trust. I sat there reading it over and over again until the words blurred. I cried reading it, not because I missed Rick, God no, but because I missed her. The version of my mom that used to protect me, the woman who used to work double shifts just to buy me a prom dress, the woman who once said that no man would ever come before her child. Somewhere along the way, that woman had gotten lost inside someone else's chaos. It was like she had been slowly rewritten by Rick's misery, line by line, until I barely recognized her anymore. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter spread out beside my cold cup of coffee, thinking about how everything between us had turned into damage control. For years she had been the one putting out Rick's fires, but lately it felt like she expected me to do the same. Every time I refused, I became the enemy. Still, reading her words, I felt that pull again. The same one I felt since childhood. This instinct to fix things, to bring her back to herself. That night I called her. I didn't even know what I wanted to say. The phone rang longer than usual before she answered. Her voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that sounds tired all the way through. I told her I got her letter and that I was sorry things had gotten so bad. She said she didn't know how it all went so wrong, that Rick had been drinking more, that he'd started blaming everyone for the eviction, including her. She said he'd thrown out most of his things in a fit of rage, and then stormed off somewhere she didn't want to think about. I asked her if she was safe, and she said she was staying with Aunt Deborah for now, that Deborah was being kind but that she felt like a burden. I told her she was not a burden, that she could always stay with me if she left him for good. There was silence on the line for a few seconds. I could hear her breathing, the faint sound of a television in the background. Then she said softly that she didn't know if she could do that he needed her. The words hit me harder than I expected. After everything he'd done, lying to the police, yelling in my home, destroying things that mattered to me, she still saw him as someone to save. I wanted to tell her that he didn't need saving, that he needed consequences, but I could hear how fragile she sounded. I didn't want to push her away completely. We stayed on the phone for a little while longer, both of us saying things that didn't really mean much, asking about the weather, how work was, if I'd eaten dinner. It felt like we were both clinging to something that had already been torn in half. Eventually, she said she should get some rest, that Aunt Deborah had made up the guest room for her, and that she was going to try to sleep. Her voice wavered a little when she said goodnight, and then the line went silent. I sat there for a long time after the call ended, staring at my phone, the letter still open on the table. There was so much I wanted to tell her, so many things I wished I could fix, but I knew she wasn't ready to hear any of it. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the drawer with my old family photos, the ones where she was smiling and Rick was still pretending to be a good man. I turned off the light, sat in the dark for a while, and thought about how love can twist people until they don't even recognize themselves anymore. She said, "I don't know if I can do that, Em. He needs me." And that was the end of the call. Last night I got a call from Jenna again. It was late, close to midnight, and I almost didn't answer because I thought it was another one of those calls where she'd tell me something new about Rick that I didn't want to hear. But something in my chest told me to pick up. Her voice was sharp and urgent when she said that Rick had been arrested. At first, I thought I had misheard her, but then she repeated it. He'd been caught trying to pawn some stolen tools from his old job, the same one he always said had disrespected him. The same place he swore he left on principle, not because he'd been fired for drinking. I sat there in bed, staring at the ceiling while Jenna filled in the details. Apparently, He had shown up at a pawn shop with several high-end tools that were marked with serial numbers belonging to the auto shop he used to work at. The owner recognized them and called the police. Rick was taken in on the spot. It felt surreal hearing it out loud. There was a strange mixture of emotions, anger, disbelief, and an odd sense of relief. He had finally done something that no one could excuse, something so clear that even my mother couldn't twist it into another one of his mistakes. But that hope didn't last long. The next morning, my mother bailed him out using her emergency savings. I only found out because she texted me later. The message said, "I hope you're happy now. He's in trouble again." For a second I just stared at it, not sure what to feel. Happy? There was nothing happy about any of this. It was another cycle. Another chapter of her trying to save a man who had done nothing but drag her down for years. I replied, "Mom, you can't keep saving him." She didn't answer. The silence felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I thought that was the end of it, that she would go quiet again and let things unravel like they always did. But this morning there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, my mother was standing there, alone, holding a small suitcase. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of everything had finally pressed the air out of her. She didn't say much at first. She just stood there in the hallway, trembling, and then she whispered that I had been right. She said that Rick told her to ask me for more money to pay his lawyer, and when she said no, he hit her. I felt my whole body go cold. It wasn't the first time I'd worried he might cross that line, but hearing that he actually did it broke something inside me. I didn't ask questions. I just took her suitcase, brought her inside, and locked the door behind us. She looked around the apartment like it was the first time she'd really seen it. Then she sat down on the couch and started crying quietly, the kind of crying that comes from deep exhaustion, not shock. She's sleeping there now, wrapped in one of my blankets, and the apartment feels still in a way it hasn't in years. There's no shouting, no phone buzzing with guilt-laced messages, no fear lingering in the corners. Just quiet. When she woke up this morning, she looked at me with this expression that I can only describe as empty and said she hadn't slept that well in months. I asked if she was hungry and she nodded. So we made pancakes just like we used to when I was a kid. I found the old pan with the worn handle, the one she always used, and it felt like muscle memory. Mixing the batter, watching the edges bubble, flipping them just in time. We didn't talk much while we cooked. There was no need to. It felt like everything we needed to say had already been said in the silence between us. When we finally sat down to eat, she looked out the window and said softly that she didn't know what came next, that she was tired of trying to fix things that were never hers to fix. I told her I wasn't angry anymore, just tired too. She looked at me for a long moment, nodded slowly, and said, "I think I finally am too." There was something final in the way she said it. Not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet surrender to the truth. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to convince her of anything. I didn't have to argue or beg her to see what was right in front of her. She finally did. Now the house feels peaceful. The air is light, the kind of calm that comes after a storm when the world feels washed clean. I made her tea and she fell back asleep on the couch, her breathing steady, her face softer than I've seen it in a long time. The morning light is coming through the curtains, and for the first time, the silence feels safe instead of lonely. I don't know what the future looks like from here. I don't know if she'll ever go back to him, or if this is truly the end. But right now, this quiet moment feels like something we've both been chasing for years without realizing it. There's no big victory, no confrontation, no perfect ending. Just two people finally free of someone who took too much for too long, sharing pancakes in a kitchen that finally feels like home again. This is what closure looks like. Not a dramatic final act, not a perfect resolution, but a quiet morning where the bad guy is gone, and the people who were left behind are finally free.